of timer 1. Timer low 1 is the lower byte of timer 1, because remember timer 1 is 16 bits, but it's identified by those two 8-bit blocks. And similarly for timer 0, that's the upper 8 bits of timer 0, and that's the lower 8 bits of timer 0. I already told you there is a register, a control register if you like, that sets the mode of operation for the timers, called tmod. And this is what tmod looks like. So as I said, half of it deals with configuring timer 1, and the other half of it configures timer 0. And I'll talk a little bit about what that does. Gate and CT, I'm going to show you in a later diagram the impact that they have. M1 and M0 are the mode bits. So you have a choice of 4 possible modes for this timer. And you're expected to know about all 4 modes, 2 of them in a lot of detail. So this, if you like, sets the mode of operation. Mode 0, Mode 1, Mode 2, and Mode 3. So if you wanted the timer to be in Mode 2, you make this go high, you make this go low. If you want it in Mode 3, high, high. If you want it in Mode 0, low, low. And the same thing for this timer. Right. There was a couple of other things in that tmod register, and this is showing you their impact. This is actually quite a nice diagram that shows the whole, this is the timer itself, and in the case here, we're actually showing you all the circuitry associated with timer 1. So there's the 16-bit timer register itself, timer 1. There's the flag. But we can see how this arrow going here is basically the arrow that gives pulses that cause this to count. And this always counts upwards. And it counts upwards from whatever value you've loaded into it. When it gets to effectively FFFF, or 16 ones, and you then send the next pulse in, this will all become zeros, and this flag will become set. You can test for that, and it's up to you usually to clear that flag. Okay. Now let's see how those pulses are getting into this timer that make it count. Okay. Well, they're coming from, first of all, we've got this set of things down here. So this is an open-close switch, and you can see that this switch is under the control of these bits here. One of them is actually a bit inside another register called TCOM. So if this goes high, and let's assume this is an AND gate, let's assume that this is high 2, okay, then this will close this switch and it will start counting. If you like, if there's pulses coming in, they'll pass through to here and it'll be counting. Whereas if you were to make TR1 go low, even though this other pathway is still high, because it's an AND gate, if this has gone low here, effectively this will be low, in which case the switch will be open, so it doesn't matter what's happening over here, it will have no impact. So TR is one means of, if you like, activating or disabling the count. However, in addition to TR, we can see that we have this other circuitry down here. Let's talk about, forget about the gate for a minute. So this is an OR gate. Let's assume that we've set it to run. But we have this interrupt here, this pin here, and we make this pin go low. Actually, I'd assume the gate's low as well. Well, actually, this will be high, which would go low, so this will be low anyway. And we've made this go low. So we've got effectively a low on here. Under those circumstances, even though we've said it's okay, you can start counting, because this pathway is low, this will still be low here, so the switch will be open. But when you make this pin go high, you can then start counting. So you have a mechanism now where you could use this flag to say, I want you to count, but you have an external pin that you could be pressing, that only when that pin goes high does it allow it to count, and when you take your finger off it, it stops counting again. So you've got effectively, you can use it like something like an external enable pin to enable count for a bit and then stop the counting, enable the count for a bit and stop the counting from an external source. You also have this gate thing here, which enables you to effectively disable the impact of this, because what you could do is if you make this gate go low, which means this goes high, then it doesn't matter what's happening here, this pathway will always be enabled. So you've got some extra control on the external pin. There was another, this is all, now that was in, we saw that was in the TMOD register, and we saw this was in the TMOD register. The CT pin determines where is the source of the count coming from. C stands for count and T stands for timer. The count, if you make this go high, it basically makes the switch go this way, and it's an external pin which is used to count the pulses in. And that can be very useful where you don't care how long something takes. What you care about is that you've counted, say, 50 of them. So you don't care if it takes 1 minute to count 50 or 5 hours to count 50. What matters is the number. Well, you could use this pin each time you've counted another one to come through here and add one to here, and you could be testing the value of it, so to speak. So if we want to use the timer as a counter, we can use this, set it into counter mode, and then the absolute time it takes to do something we don't care about anymore. It's the numerical value that we're counting that matters. Or, alternatively, I can make this go low, and if I make this go low, basically this goes to the up position, and now this pin has no impact whatsoever. We don't care about that anymore. And now the source of pulses comes from our oscillator circuit. They go through effectively a divide by 12 unit, because it actually takes one machine cycle to do the count. So whatever the oscillator frequency you've opted for, it'll be a 12th of that, which is actually the speed at which the pulses are going in, if you've asked for timer mode. And as I said before, if, for example, you had a 12 megahertz crystal, then you'd be generating 1 million pulses per second at this point, not 12 million pulses per second. So the count would be going up one every millionth of a second. So these, now we have, this is the circuitry for timer 1. It's exactly the same for the other timer. Okay? So you can use the timers as timers, and I showed you how I could have it to create delays of known amounts, or you can use it as a counter. And I think there's an example on the slides of both of those. Right, cast your brain back to the TMOD register. So the TMOD register is in 2 halves, and in each of those halves you've got a count timer select. Is your timer going to be a counter, or is it going to function as a timer? You've got a gate flag, a gate control if you like, and then you had 2 other bits which determined what mode the timer was in. And these are the 4 modes that each timer can be programmed to operate in. And you're expected to know this. The first mode we don't use very often. It's called mode 0, and although it's a 16-bit timer, we effectively ignore 5 of the bits in the 16-bit register. Technically, they become what's known as a pre-scaler, so although they're kind of counting, we don't show them. So it functions as basically a 13-bit register, a 13-bit timer. Primarily, that mode is put there because, believe it or not, the 8051, although it's incredibly old, there's an even older microcontroller called the 8048. And the 8048 had a 13-bit timer. And for backwards compatibility, they put that mode in. So it's very, very rare that we use this mode. And I wouldn't expect to know the details of it at all. The next 2 modes are the modes that you're expected to know about in a lot more detail. Mode 1 is basically use the timer, or the counter, as a 16-bit entity, using all 16 bits. That means that that overflow flag will only be set when you've got all 16 bits set to 1 and then you add one more. Okay? When that overflow flag becomes set and you get a wraparound or whatever, it will start counting again from 0. Put that to one side for a minute, and now let's talk about mode 2. Mode 2 basically takes a 16-bit timer and uses it as two 8-bit entities. And I'll show you how it works. So I'm going to rub a bit off. Let's get rid of that bit. I don't think I need that anymore. So, in mode 2, it's known as 8-bit auto reload. I showed you an example over here where I might want a timer to basically set this flag at a known interval. I could either do it every 5 microseconds or every 6 microseconds. Let's do the case of where I want it to cause an overflow every 5 microseconds. What I need to do is load into, for example, let's pick timer 0 for the hell of it. So we'll do timer low 0. If I was to put this value in there, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, and we enable it. We start the timer counting, and it's being driven from the oscillator, the clock circuit. And I'm also assuming that the clock circuit is running at 12 megahertz, which means that effectively the pulses going into this is a 12th of that speed. So there's 1 million pulses per second, not 12 million pulses per second. Or another way of thinking about it, one pulse comes in 1/1000th of a second, or 1 microsecond. Are you with me still? Yeah? No? 1 over 1 million is a microsecond. Okay? So 1 million microseconds is 1 second. It takes, this count is incrementing at a rate of 1 microsecond. It takes 1 microsecond between pulses, and each time a pulse comes in, we add 1 to the count. Okay? We've initialized this part of this timer to this value. Well, if we initialized it to that value, after 1 pulse, it will get to this value. After 2 pulses, it will get to this value. 3 pulses, this value. 4 pulses, this value. On the 5th pulse, it will get to this value. It will wrap around, and it will set the flag. So it's taken 5 microseconds for it to achieve that.
If you keep going round and round, will the flag go on and off?
No. Usually it's up to you to clear the flag manually. So once it's set, until you clear it, it's high. I hesitate slightly because I think when you use interrupts, it might be that under certain circumstances the flag gets cleared automatically. But generally speaking, assume it's your job to clear the flag. Okay. So if I was to load this value in, I know that provided the crystal is 12 megahertz, the TF0 flag will go high 5 microseconds later. Can people see that? Because if I load that value in now, that's the value there. I've loaded that value in. After 1 microsecond, we add 1 to that, which gets us to here. After another microsecond, we add 1 to it, and we get to here. Another microsecond, we add 1, we get to here. Another microsecond, we add 1 here, and eventually we get to here. 5 microseconds later. At that point in time, let's say I want to do this again. I think, I want these pulses to be basically, I want to set this flag every 5 microseconds. Because I could be testing this flag, and it may be every 5 microseconds I want to make an LED flash on and off. So I could have a little routine testing this flag, and every time it becomes high, I do something with the LED, and then I clear the flag, and wait for the next time it becomes high again. Now if I want it to be 5 microseconds apart, when I get the overflow to here, I don't want it to continue counting from that value. Because to get from that value wrapping around will take 256 steps. But I don't want it to take 256 steps, I want it to take 5 steps. So as soon as the flag is set, what I would want to do is to put back in this register, this value again, to start the count from this value, not start the count from 0. So if we started here, it would count all the way up to eventually 1111, 1111, and then it would go 0000, 0000, and this flag would become set, the TF flag. At that point in time, what I don't want it to do is to carry on counting from 0. I want it to carry on counting from this value. So once the flag becomes set, I would reload into the timer this number. Okay, I would move that value back in. Now, why am I going through all this horrible, painful thing? Because in 8-bit auto reload mode, the value that gets reloaded into this timer, you can have it do it for you automatically. And the value that gets reloaded is stored in the high half of the timer. So what I would do in here is store the value So I'm using half of the timer as a kind of a temporary register to hold the reload number. The other half of the timer is actually doing the counting for me. So what would happen is I load this in, this starts counting up, gets to all ones, then it gets to all zeros, the flag becomes set, I go and do something like make a cup of coffee, and I want it to restart the count again, but I don't want it to restart from 0. I can get it to automatically, when the flag becomes set, to put that value back in there. I don't have to manually do it.
So is all this happening without the CPU helping?
Yes, this can all be done, and the CPU can theoretically do something else. So in a way, this reloading of this value into here, you could be using the accumulator and doing other things at the same time.
So how quick is the reload?
That reload takes, I think it would be 1 machine cycle.
Still.
So, or whether it's done in the same, I'd have to check. At the time the flag's set, it would be done at the same time, but exactly how quickly it does it, I don't really know.
But because it's not an instruction, could it be quicker than the machine cycle?
It could be, yes. But I don't actually know exactly how quick it is, but it's quick. I think it's quick enough that you wouldn't actually notice the reload. It's kind of, well, that doesn't mean anything, does it? Effectively, if I had done my 5 microsecond thing, that reload wouldn't have a significant impact on that 5 microseconds at all. So
you haven't got to factor it into your time?
No, you haven't. Things like doing testing on flags, you would have to factor in, for sure. And that test, because you're actually executing an instruction, you've got to fetch the instruction to do the comparison or something.
So basically you've got to test it almost before it's happening, so it catches up with it.
Well, there's 2 ways we can do this. If we could use interrupts, we don't need to worry about this. If we're not using interrupts, we have to manually test the flag, and that takes time, because we're actually calling up the instruction to do the test for us. So we have to go to the program memory, fetch the instructions on, that takes time to do it. So yes, if you're doing it that way, you'll have to factor it in, absolutely. So, the advantage of 8-bit auto reload is once you start the timer running, effectively, on a regular basis, the flag will overflow and become high, and automatically, when it overflows, the timer, the low part of it, will be overwritten with the value that you stored in the high part of the timer, and it will start counting from that point again. It would be your job, ordinarily, to clear this flag, though. I think. I'll have to check that. So that's the mode 2, yeah?
So you've got to make sure you can clear it fast enough.
Yeah, I'd have to check that. I'll check by next week. In the 8-bit auto reload, that the flag is cleared. I'd have to check whether it's cleared manually or automatically, I'm not sure, because it's auto reload. But I think you have to clear it manually, in which case, yes, you'd have to do it quick enough.
So it doesn't have a special quick method
you could just
for you to do
I
it?
don't know. I don't think so. No. So what usually happens, if I'm doing interrupt, now the reason I'm hesitating a little bit is because I think when you're doing it through interrupts, I think the flag will get cleared automatically. When it invokes the interrupt routine, you don't have to manually go and clear the flag, I think it's done automatically. But if you're doing the manual testing, not using interrupts, it's your job to clear the flag. But I'll check that for when we do interrupts. Anyway, so that's mode 2. Okay, so mode 0 is just a 13-bit timer. Mode 1 is a 16-bit timer, and when you get to the maximum value, 1111 or FFFF if you like, and you add one more to it, you will get the flag to overflow, and it will start counting from all the zeros. Now if you don't want it to start counting from all the zeros, you've got to go in and load up the 16-bit number that you wanted to start counting from again. So the 16-bit mode, there's no auto reload of it. It's your job to set the count back to an initial appropriate value. Which you can do. Basically what I would, let's say I want to, I'm in 16-bit mode, so this is mode 1. And in mode 1, I want it to do a 2 microsecond delay. Okay? So to achieve a 2 microsecond delay, I've got to think about, it's going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't know if there's 8 there, I'm not counting them precisely, but it's that transition which would cause the flag to overflow. That would be a 1 microsecond, if I'm using a 12 megahertz crystal, that would take 1 microsecond. Because it's 1 pulse fed into this, and for every 12 clock cycles I get 1 pulse to the count. So that's 1 microsecond. But I said I wanted a 2 microsecond delay, so I would have to the reload value I would need would be this, because it would take 1 microsecond to get it to count to this, another microsecond to get it to count to this, and the flag would overflow. That's my 2 microseconds. 1 microsecond, 2 microseconds. I then want another 2 microsecond delay. That's the value that's now in the counter. That's no good to me. I would want it to, I want this 2 microseconds to happen regularly. I'd have to reload it with that value. How would I do that? I would say, and I think you can actually write directly to the registers. So you could say move into timer high 1, for example, immediately 0FF hex. That's that chunk. Move into timer low 1, immediately 0FE. Now, this actually takes time to execute. It takes maybe 1 or 2 machine cycles. So actually, I couldn't actually, using this technique, reliably generate pulses 2 microseconds apart. Okay. But assuming that this took no time, that's effectively how I would reload a value in here. Now, if you've got a bigger delay, it's not a problem, but you need to factor in really the time it takes to actually reload things. What I'm getting on here is in mode 1, if you want to reload to a specific value, it's your job to write the code to do that. It's not automatic. All that happens in mode 1 is when we reach the maximum value and add 1 more, we will get the overflow flag set. In mode 0, we chop the 16-bit time, sorry, in mode 2 I should say, we chop the 16-bit timer into 2 8-bit timers, and one of the 8-bit timers acts as the timer, and the other 8-bit thing holds a special number, the reload value. In that case, when we get the timer to overflow, it's gone from all 1s to all 0s. At that point in time, the all 0s, you won't see them because they'll be overwritten by the value that's held in the other half of the timer, automatically. You don't have to write the code to do that, and it will do it quickly. The third mode, because we've talked about mode 0, well, if you like the fourth mode, it's a bit pedantic. You've got mode 0, mode 1, mode 2, mode 3 is where it's called a split timer mode, where you can chop up a 16-bit timer and get it to function a bit like two separate 8-bit timers. But only one of those 8-bit timers is actually wired to the overflow flag. So although the other timer will overflow, there is no flag to test it. We don't often use it, but it is there if you want to. So, where are we? So, in an exam, if something came up on timers, you would all know that there are 4 modes of operation, and those 4 modes of operation are selectable from the Tmod register. Mode 0 is, I want the timer to be a 13-bit timer. Mode 1, I want it to be a 16-bit timer. When it overflows, it's your job to reload whatever value you need in there. Mode 2 is an 8-bit timer with auto reload, which means when it overflows, whatever's in the high byte of the timer will automatically get copied into the low byte of the timer. So you can get it to reload to a predefined value, and you don't have to write any special code to cause those reloads. And then mode 3 is we chop the 16-bit timer into 2 8-bit timers. Right, here's a little bit more about the CT flag. We've already seen how it works. This is the flag which is used to determine the source of the pulses. If it's in count mode, the pulses come from an external pin. If it's in timer mode, it comes from the oscillator circuit. And it's just showing you here how to, if you like, determine whether CT is high or low, ways to write to it. One thing to bear in mind with the Tmod register, which is why this is probably here, is the Tmod register is not bit addressable. Which means if you want to change an individual bit in it, you can't just go in like set B or clear and change that bit. What you're going to have to do is to change a whole byte at a time. So you're going to have to work out what all the values should be, and you write them all in one go. Okay. So we've got an example here. If you wanted, for example, timer 0 to be in mode 1, and you want it to function as a timer, not a counter. We go back to the Tmod register for a minute, just to remind us what it looks like. So we're looking in here, we're talking about timer 0. We want it to be in mode 1, I think it said. We want it to function as a timer, not a counter. And we don't want the gate to prevent this operation from happening. What it's saying is the appropriate value you would need to write in here is this one here. Those least two significant bits set the mode of the timer 0. 0, 1 says I want the timer in mode 1. The next bit, I think, is the CT flag. I can't remember. Yes, it is. And if we look at this drawing, when CT is low, basically we're saying we want it to be driven from the internal clock, i.e. function as a timer, not a counter, which is precisely what we've done. So that's why this bit is 0 here. And the gate bit is 0 because we don't want it to prevent the timing operation from going on. Remember, that bit is inverted feeding into the OR gate. So that won't prevent anything. So that would basically say, I want timer 0 to be in mode 1, and it's functioning as a timer, it's not functioning as a counter. And there have been questions in the past in the exam saying things like, oh, timer 0, timer 1, I want you to configure it in a certain mode. So you would have to know what values to write into the Tmod register in order to configure the timer in the appropriate mode. There's another example down here. And in this particular case, we're also, what are we doing here? We're doing something with, this is actually showing us writing. Now here, we wrote a whole byte, but all the upper nibble was all zeros. So effectively, we had the other timer set for actually mode 0, and we've written CT to be 0, and we've written gate to be 0. But we've just written that because we don't really care what's going on with that timer. Remember, just because you configure the timer in a certain mode doesn't mean it's actually going to do anything. There is a flag